morning. Today I'd like to speak about the neuroscience of great client relationships. You will learn that great client relationships are a lot like a good marriage without the sex. So if you're already the greatest rainmaker under the stars and you have the best possible client relationships ever and you have nothing to learn here today, your significant other might still benefit from your paying attention this morning. So in order to wake you all up after last night's celebration, I'd like to start with a little quiz. Who's familiar with the Maslow pyramid of need? Do you know that? Oh, great. I see many people who have learned a lot in management school. So can you tell me what's at the very bottom of the pyramid? Sorry? So food, things like food, water, basic needs, okay? That's the most essential things you need in order to survive. People can only go without water, I think, for maybe 48 hours or something like this. So that's the really basic thing. What's next? Once you have the food, what are you going to look for? Shelter. So we can call this safety. So the idea is, you first get something to eat. You get something to drink, and then you want to feel safe and protected and not attacked by your enemies, so you need to make sure you're safe. What's next? Once we're safe, what are we looking for? Relationships. So social relationships come in after. It's only logical. You first want to eat and drink, then you want to feel safe, and then you start thinking about having a family, friends, socializing, finding a spouse, and things like that. And your client would come in on that third level as well if you're creating relationships. So what's at the very top? Very good, self-actualization. So the idea is you get the food, you feel safe, you take your social needs into account, and then once you have all that, you start thinking about who do I want to be, what do I want to become, what do I want to do with my life? Is it becoming an EY tax partner, or what am I going to do? The problem with this model is, even though everybody knows it, and a lot of economic theory is built on these kind of ideas that people think like this and people act like this, it's all wrong. I could go like this. So why is it wrong? Because we are wired to be social. Our social needs here should be at the very bottom. Why should they be at the very bottom? Because as creatures, we don't survive on our own. The baby is not born and goes right away into the forest to collect berries. People don't survive on their own very long when they're in wilderness. From an evolutionary perspective, we used to live in small tribes of maybe 150 people, and then we protected each other. If you were excluded from that group of people, that was a death sentence. Okay, so today I'd like to show you that social relationships are so essential to our brain that they should be at the very bottom. So your client is not just somebody nice to have, it's actually something, that is wired into our brain, our desire to have great relationships and the pain we feel when we don't. Thank you, Jeff. What do we see here? I'm a neuroscientist, so when I look at this picture, I'm seeing a person in pain. I'm thinking, has this person been tortured in the brain scanner? Did they hack off this person's hand? Because what you see is an activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is where we process pain, physical pain. And then you see activity in the right ventral prefrontal cortex trying to cope with the pain. So what you see here is a typical activity pattern of somebody who maybe has acute or chronic pain. But that's not what happened here. Imagine I invite one of you to come to the laboratory, and I say, hey, could you please come in and participate in a little experiment? and you will get a joystick, a bit like my clicker here. You will lay down in the brain scanner. You will see a big screen above your head, and then you will get invited to play a game of cyberball. What is cyberball? Cyberball is a game where you toss balls back and forth between different people. So you have 3 players. One of the people is you, and then you have 2 more people, and you're told they're in different rooms. So the 3 of you play together. During the first 10 minutes, you all play nicely, okay? You toss the ball back and forth, you catch it, you enjoy it. It's kind of fun. You feel like, I could do this every day. It's a bit like playing a video game. After 10 minutes, the other 2 players suddenly start to only play the ball between each other. So you are left out. And that's when you see this activity pattern. It's a person in pain, but it's the pain of rejection. It's the pain of social exclusion. Our brain processes physical pain in the very same way it is processing social pain. This has been discovered, and it was a huge hit in the neuroscience community because it shows us how deeply affected we are when our social relationships go wrong. And think about it, you go to this laboratory for just 1 hour, you play with 2 other people you've never met and you will never see again, and your brain reacts like that. It even goes the other way around. If, let's say, you suffer from a heartbreak, you're going through a divorce and you feel very badly about that loss of that relationship, you can take a Tylenol, a pain medication, and you will feel better. I'm not telling you guys to do that. I'm just telling you that the so-called body-mind connection is much stronger than we ever thought. It's not just something your yoga teacher would tell you, but neuroscience shows that physical pain and social pain are the same thing to our brains. What do we see here? 20 years ago, researchers asked the question, what is our brain doing when we do nothing? Okay? Let's say you're working on your taxes, you're doing something, and then you're just taking a break and having a coffee, maybe by yourself. This is what your brain does. What you see here is the so-called default mode network. Your brain has a network of certain areas of your brain that work together that go on when you do nothing special. Now you might think this is a very boring network because it's doing nothing special. It turns out that this network that always gone on as soon as you do nothing is also the social network of your brain. So the moment you start doing nothing, what does your brain do? It immediately switches into social mode. So the default mode of our brain is to think about ourselves and to think about other people. That's how important it is to our brain. Have you heard about these 10,000 hours you need to reach excellence? It's been very popular a way back. I don't necessarily agree, but you could think about when you look at this theory, which says that you need to practice something for 10,000 hours in order to become really an expert. By the age of 7, a child will have put these 10,000 hours into social behavior just by looking at how much the default mode network in the brain has been activated. This is important to us, okay? Now I'm asking you, what's the single most important change you could do to your health, which will allow you to live 8 years longer? What would you do? Would you quit smoking? Would you start exercising? Would you try to stress less and to sleep more? What is it you would do if I asked you, how can you improve your health? Hiking? Talking? Hugging, yes? Well, it turns out you're right. It shows, and I will actually talk about hugging today. We're not going to do any hugging, but we're going to talk about hugging. You can choose to do hugging later. But it turns out that if you have bad social relationships, you will die 8 years earlier on average. That's a lot. That's roughly 10% of your lifespan from, if you look at it, you're better number masters than I am, so you can calculate this, but 8 years of your life will hinge on whether you have great relationships or bad ones on average. So I made the case that social relationships are important to your health. What about profit? What you see here is a correlation between the trust level in countries and GDP per capita. So what you see here, and I know, Bridget has warned me, and she said these people are number masters. If you present any data, they will start looking at it and crunching it. But what you see here is a correlation. Countries that are higher in trust are also more prosperous and have a better economic growth and situation. There are some outliers, but it turns out that it pays off to have good relationships as well. And this is true on a company level as well. Some researchers, they took 300 large companies in the US and they measured trust levels within the organization. And what they found is that the companies that had high trust levels were also the ones doing better in terms of profit. And it came down to $10,000 of revenue-related income per employee. So, you can calculate that. But it turns out that there is a correlation between good social relationships and profit. You're here to make profit, so today I'm going to show you how to create good relationship that will probably lead to that profit. It all comes down to a chemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a neurochemical that is released when we have great social relationships. It is released when a baby is born. It is released when people fall in love. And it is released even in a business setting when people interact with each other. 10 years ago, most researchers said, oxytocin, why should we study oxytocin? I think only women have it. That's not important to us. It turns out not only women have it, men have it too. And in every single social relationship, oxytocin is released to a certain degree. And we will learn all about it today. So today I'm going to show you 10 ways to enhance oxytocin levels. That's what we're going to do today. So I give you 10 practical things with your client you can do to enhance oxytocin levels, which is a chemical that modulates your relationship. Are you ready for that? Okay. Well, it turns out you can buy love after all. You can just go to the pharmacy and pick this up, but it's regulated, so don't run now on Amazon and the internet and buy the oxytocin that you can find oxytocin spray, all kinds of, they call it the love spray, and people order that stuff like crazy. It doesn't work. I tell you why it doesn't work. Not because oxytocin isn't working, but because it needs to be applied into your nose, right up here, and that's a very uncomfortable process. So if you want to do that prior to a client meeting or a romantic dinner, then this will be very, very difficult. And you first have to say, oh, wait a moment, you have something at your nose, and then you spray it. That's not very practical. And at the same time, it needs to be cooled. Oxytocin will lose its power when it's in a warm environment, so you need to have dry ice. But the moment, if you now go on Amazon and order it, by the time it gets to your doorstep, all the oxytocin is gone. So don't order it. I will give you 10 natural ways to increase oxytocin levels. Let's take it from this guy. He knows. One very simple way to get more oxytocin is by touching other people. And don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to touch your clients, okay? I'm just telling you, you should know that one of the most powerful ways to release oxytocin is by hugging, kissing, touching. A handshake is never just a handshake. The moment you shake hands with somebody, oxytocin will be released. Why am I telling you this? There's no practical insight for you with your clients, okay? You're not going to start hugging your clients, but you should know that the moment we meet somebody physically, in person, something chemical happens in your brain. So it does make a difference whether you have a virtual kickoff just on the phone with somebody or whether you meet in person and actually get to see that person. So what you're doing here today, actually coming together and meeting each other, will increase everybody's oxytocin level. So basically, physical touch matters. Physical presence makes a difference. Putin knows this as well. So it even works when you cuddle an animal. You know, as soon as you engage in hugging, kissing, cuddling, it's going to work. It has even been shown that when a waitress in a restaurant casually touches your shoulder when you make your order, she will receive a higher tip. I'm not telling you to touch your clients, okay? I'm just telling you there's lots of studies that show that touch is never casual. I have had a personal trainer after my pregnancies, and this guy, I think he read all of these sales books on how to sell stuff to people, okay? He was just perfect. He said my name every 5 seconds. He was like, Friederike, go, you can do it. He hugged me all of the time. It was like high fives and hugging, but it always felt wrong to me. It felt to me like something he has read somewhere. He maybe read the study with the waitress, and then regardless of who entered the room, everybody got these hugs and kisses. I felt like I was his long-lost sister from separated at birth, and then when we met, it was like, hi, you know, and then all this hugging started. So I always felt like taking a shower afterwards. Not because I was so sportive and sweating more, because, you know, all of the touching. So don't go and force your touch on people. It can have the opposite effect if they feel that it's fake and you're just doing this to get oxytocin levels up. You can try this at home, of course. I can only encourage you to imagine what it will do if you hug your kids, if you kiss your partner. Oxytocin will increase, and that will strengthen your bond and your connection. So do it at home, don't do it to your client. So my rule number 1 is meetings matter. You should understand that it does make a difference whether we work together virtually or in person. I'm not saying that you have to do every single meeting in person. That would be insane. But maybe try to meet people at least once in the beginning, you know, at the beginning of a relationship. Try to find a way to meet people in person. If I heard that you text people are very shy and some of you are introverts and you are very much experts on the topic, but you don't always want to interact with your client, well, force yourself. Go out to dinner sometimes. You know, have a coffee with your client. Don't shy away from your client. I'm sure you know all this. I'm just giving you the science behind it. So meetings matter. This is my husband going hiking. This was taken this summer. Why am I sharing this with you? What's so spectacular about it? Well, before he met me, he spent his weekend working on cars and going to these old-timer meetings, stuff that I really don't find interesting at all. So when I met him, I thought, I need to change that guy, right? He needs to start hiking. And I used that magic first interactions with him to shape our relationship, because I knew about oxytocin and he didn't. So I had all the advantage. So now we are spending the weekends hiking, and it could also have been the other way around, that I get to spend my weekends going to these old-timer meetings, and that I didn't want to have happening. So the beginnings are a magic period. You have to imagine, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it anymore, but when my husband met me, he had this perfect bachelor pad. Everything was designed, color coordinated. He somehow just decided to create his dream apartment after his divorce. So his idea was, I create this perfect space for myself. Then I came along, and I moved in, and I destroyed it all. It was beautiful when I moved in, and now it looks awful. Why did I do this? I actually did a little bit of this on purpose, because I wanted him to realize, hey, something new is happening. You have the beginning of a relationship to do these things. So I actually put up some really cheap and ugly artwork from IKEA just to make a point. Because I felt he is living in his perfect dream. I move in, he won't even notice. Why am I telling you all of these stories? The beginning of a relationship matters. Whatever habit you establish in the beginning is probably going to stay with you going forward. Because we have a surge of oxytocin in the beginning. That's when people are flexible mentally. That's when people are ready to change. Can you imagine your client asking you, can I wake you up 3 to 4 times every night to get food? You'll probably say, hey, buddy, we have a great relationship, but let's not take it that far. Well, would you do that for your baby? Would you go to the hospital in the middle of the night for your partner or your spouse? When we meet somebody new, we change all of our routines. We might live in a different country. We might move somewhere else. We change our hobbies. We suddenly develop an interest for collecting stamps or whatever it is. Use that moment. It's not just when people fall in love romantically. Even in every new professional relationship, you establish things in the very beginning. Use that wisely. I have a friend who wasn't so smart about this. She met her husband, and her idea was, I will wow him with my perfect dinners. Okay, so she's a really good cook, and she cooks all of these elaborate gourmet meals with antipasti and first course and second and third and pre-dessert and dessert. Well, he's spoiled. By now, they have kids, that's some trouble. She's still stuck in that routine of having to create these elaborate dishes because he got used to it in the very beginning. That's his baseline. If he ever came to our house, he would be shocked. Her husband is used to these really elaborate meals, and 20 years later, he still expects them. Even though life has changed and they have several kids and lots of other trouble, he still wants these meals because she kind of got it wrong in the beginning. She should have started a little bit more low-key so that she can keep that up long term. I once worked in an office where everybody was like this. We came in at 9, and then you would go from office door to office door and greet all of your colleagues. We were hugging and kissing and saying, how was your weekend? How's your dog? How's your daughter? How did it go at the dentist? We know everything about each other's lives. And we had great relationships. But I hate to break it to you, I never got any work done in this office. It was awful. Whenever I wanted to work, I went home. I stayed away. I put plants around my office space to shield from other people. Everything was glass and open door, of course, so that we could socialize. I closed the door, which was already a shock to my colleagues. And then one day, they hired a new person, and where was that person supposed to sit? In my office. I knew this was going to go downhill, so I made up a decision. The moment she entered on her very first day, she came into my office. She sat down, and I said, hello, nice to meet you. Great you're joining the team. There's one thing we need to be clear about. In this room, we work. We don't talk. We don't disturb each other. I have headphones on. When you see me with my headphones, don't talk to me. That was a very nice and charming start I had prepared for her. But it worked, right? With her, I had exactly the relationship I wanted to have. I wanted us not to talk. I wasn't looking for a new best friend. I was looking for a space where I could get my work done. So whenever she wanted to socialize, she left the office. Whenever she wanted to talk to me, we took it outside. We didn't speak in that space. And that saved me. You don't have to go to that extremes, but imagine if I had done this after 2 weeks. Normally, people would start out a bit nice, you're new, let's chat, let's have a coffee, and then after 2 weeks you say, by the way, I want you to be quiet in here. That would have been even worse. So think about the kind of relationship you want to have with your client and shape it in the very beginning. I know that some of you guys have had very long-term relationship with your clients that you might be doomed now, right? It's too late. But of course, you can always change things later, but if you meet a new client and start on a new project, think about this. So I'm saying get things right in the beginning. Does anybody know who this girl is? Yes, Serena Williams. I imagine there's many parents in this room. And when your kids pick up their first activity, most people think, well, we don't hire an expensive coach for our kids. We just let her play a little bit, and then if she has any talents, we will get the good coach later on. That's not what Serena's parents did, and I think that was a smart choice. Think about it. At the very beginning, you learn how to hold the racket, how to position yourself on court. I'm not a tennis player, so I'm probably doing it all wrong. If you have the bad coach in the beginning, you get all the bad moves into your brain at the very beginning, and then it's almost impossible to get it out later on. So think about the power of the beginning and get it right in the beginning, because your brain is a lazy couch potato. It will pay attention in the very beginning of your relationship, and then later on, you're stuck with whatever you decided to do in the beginning. Get things right in the beginning. This is the Love Lab. You're thinking, the Love Lab, that sounds scary. Well, what you do there is you go there with your spouse, and you actually get hooked up to different machines that measure your stress level and your heart rates. And they can predict with a 90% confidence level whether you will stay together or whether you will divorce, just based on observing you for 10 minutes. That's quite good, right? Or not so good, depending on what kind of relationship you have. Why am I telling you this? Because what Dr. Gottman found out was that it all comes down to the numbers. I think you guys are going to like that idea that it's all about some magic number. It's actually a magic ratio. It turns out that you need to have a ratio of 20 to 1. If you have 20 times more positive interactions with your spouse during those 10 minutes, you will stay together rather than negative ones. But if the ratio is off and you have more negative interactions than positive ones, or just not enough positive ones, you're going to divorce with a high likelihood. So it's 20 to 1. I'm not telling you that you should sugarcoat everything and just be fakely nice to your client. I'm telling you that it matters to have the right balance. You can work on a relationship for 20 years, and then it only takes a second to destroy it. And I had this happening the other day when I went to a restaurant, and I've been a restaurant local for this specific restaurant for 10 years, and they always treated me like family until I actually brought my family. Because, I have 5 small kids, and it's a very fancy restaurant where I sometimes go with clients or business meetings. And the moment we walked in with the kids, the waiter started looking disgusted, kind of like, what are the kids doing in here? It's a fancy, nice restaurant, And they didn't treat us very nicely. Do you think we're going back there? We've been going there at least once a week without our kids for the past 10 years. Now we're not so keen anymore to go there, even though the food is great. It just takes a second to destroy it, so be very careful about all kinds of negative interactions you have with your clients, because your brain has a built-in negativity bias. And it will process negative information more strongly than positive one. So it comes down to 20-1 in good times and 5-1 in bad times. They found out that when couples are in a fight, a ratio of 5-1 is what you should aim for. It's not realistic to think that during the fight you will be 20 times nice and then one time say something nasty. So they found in good times, keep it at 20-1. In bad times, at least try to maintain the 5-1. This is something you can think about with your clients, right? How much negative vibes you're giving them and how much positive things and helpful things you're giving them. 20-1 in good times, 5-1 in bad. I told you today was going to be all about chemistry. So now we're going to talk about the impact stress will have on your relationship. I once worked as a management consultant for a big company like yours, and you have to imagine that I'm a neuropsychologist. I have no clue about business. I'm the worst possible person to make responsible for an Excel sheet. Okay, it's just not a good choice. It's just not a good idea. So they made me responsible of a huge, gigantic Excel file. It had more pages than your average dictionary. Everything was connected to everything, and I was responsible for it. And I made a mistake, and the mistake was somewhere in that document, and we were unable to find it. And it was our core document, okay, where all the sales data was going in. And my boss used to say, "Did you find the mistake? The client is going to be very unhappy. If you don't find it, we're going to fire you." That was great, helpful feedback, right? It helped a lot. So we never found the mistake, but one thing was for sure, my cortisol levels were up. I was constantly stressed. Do you think I built the best possible relationship with the client at that moment? No. Because when stress levels go up, oxytocin levels go down. So don't stress out yourself. Don't stress out your teams, because they might be the ones interacting with a client on an everyday basis. So think about the fact that the more stressed you are, the less empathy you will have, the worse your relationships will probably get. So find ways to relax your teams and yourself by getting more sleep, doing more exercise, and creating autonomy in your work life. I could do an entire speech on just how to manage stress, but just keep in mind that cortisol, which is the stress hormone, will depress oxytocin levels. So find a way to relax. Let me take you to the year 1973 in Stockholm. Have you ever heard of the famous capturing of people at the bank in Sweden? And what happened was that the 4 hostages defended their captor afterwards and refused to testify in court. It's called the Stockholm Syndrome, because they somehow teamed up, the hostages teamed up with the captor after that experience. That might sound crazy, but from a neuroscience perspective, that makes perfect sense. When we have a bit of an adventure, when something unusual happens, what's the safest thing to do? Well, create good relationships with the people around you so that you can help each other. So in stressful situations that are a bit out of the box and a bit unexpected and novel, our brain will release a substance called dopamine. And dopamine will trigger the release of oxytocin. So all of these things that you can do for team building, like going rock climbing with your client and go bungee jumping and doing a bit dangerous things, they will help you to release dopamine, and then as a result you will bond. This morning I had a very awkward thing with my pants. Somehow there was something wrong with them and holes in them, and it was right before we were going to start this. Well, you can imagine that I really bonded with a team that fixed that issue, because I didn't have an extra pair of pants, and it would have been awful to go on stage like this. It was a really bonding thing, because together we tried to fix it. So if you can, I'm not telling you that you should create an emergency with your client, but I can tell you that if you have an emergency or a little crisis or something going on, it will help you create strong bonds with the people around you, because dopamine triggers oxytocin. Imagine walking over that bridge, and it's very shaky and a bit scary, and your heart rate goes up, and you start sweating, and you walk over it. And by the end of the bridge, there's a beautiful, this is for the man in here, okay? There's a beautiful woman at the very end. For the women, they can imagine a beautiful man. But the researchers did this with men, because more men apparently walk over this bridge. So imagine then a beautiful woman greeting you, and then she says, can we take a quick psychological quiz, something? And you take 5 minutes to take that quiz, and then she says, oh, and here's my phone number in case you have any questions. Yeah, right. What questions should you have about that little quiz? They did the same experiment with a very stable bridge, where there was no danger and it was just boring to walk over it like this. And they put the same woman at the end, the same quiz, the same phone number. The people who walked over this bridge, they called her like crazy. And the people who walked over the boring bridge, they felt no need to call her. Why did they call her? It's called disattribution of arousal. You get all worked up, your heart rate goes up, you start sweating. These men didn't think they were so scared of the bridge. They thought, oh, I must have fallen in love with that beautiful woman. So they wrongly attributed their sweating and heartbeat to the woman rather than to the bridge. And of course, dopamine is released when you walk over such a bridge. And then oxytocin kicks in. So I'm not telling you to go over scary bridges with your clients, but I think it would be a good idea anyhow, right? Because when you do something a bit scary, a bit out of the rut, when you spice things up, dopamine will be released, then oxytocin will be released. So sometimes it might be a good idea to do something a bit more crazy with your client, like going on a team event where you actually experience physical danger. I once went to a management retreat with a big management consultancy and their partners. And I noticed that the partners from one office of one town in Germany, they were really best friends. They always sat together at dinner, they joked together, their spouses knew each other, they were really close. And I asked, what's going on with them? They're always together, they're so friendly, they're laughing, they're having the time of their life. And they said, well, a few years ago, these guys had a weekend regatta. They went sailing together. It was some kind of office retreat. And then they almost died. They had to save each other's lives because something happened, and then they really were out in the water, and this has bonded them for life, and they say that themselves. Since that sailing weekend, they're close like this. Don't take your client sailing, but maybe take your client hostage. Just think about ways in which you can sometimes add a little bit of spice to your interaction. So if the economic downturn is coming and your client has to do some cost cutting, maybe you're the bond in that a bit adversive situation that will help the client to go through that, and that's a way to create a great relationship. So if things go well, great, but when things go badly, that's a chance as well to enhance your relationship.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Whoa. Who knows that video? Who has seen that before? Many of you. I think as soon as you think about Bill, you also think about Monica. They're like inseparable in our minds because we remember when people lie. If you think about the very beginning when I said from the Maslow perspective, social relationships are so important, well, it's also important for us to detect when people are lying, because this might be that you, from an evolutionary perspective, you're fighting side by side with somebody, and then in the moment when it really, they could defend you and help you, they might stab you in the back or run away and leave you wounded alone. So from an evolutionary perspective, and our brains haven't changed so much during the recent years, it is important for us to identify liars. And there's one guy, when he saw that video, he knew immediately that Bill was lying, even before it came out. And that was Paul Ekman. He's an expert on lying and an expert on microfacial expressions. And what he found is, and he's worked with the FBI and the CIA and training them to detect liars. And what he found is that when people lie, they make these very small facial movements that you can't control and that you can't even see with an untrained eye, but he is trained so he can see it. Why am I telling you this? There's no better way to destroy your client relationship than by lying to them. You can build a great relationship, but when people feel deceived or when people feel lied to, trust is gone. And it's extremely hard to reestablish that. So, if possible, don't lie to your client, be honest, okay? This might be a bit of like okay, I knew that before. But think about Volkswagen. Think about all of these scandals where people are lying. Think about Martha Stewart going to court, lying about her taxes. People lie all the time because they think they can get away with it. Try to don't lie to your clients. It will be a big mess when it comes out. And your reputation might be ruined forever. It's a beautiful ring. She definitely paused for a moment before saying no. I talked to the regional head of a global consultancy the other day when I prepared this speech, because this was prepared just for you guys. It's the first time I show this to anyone, because I heard that client relationships are important to you, and then I put this together. And I asked him this question. I said, do you engage in any rituals with your clients? And he looked at me and he was like, I always knew she was strange, but so, weird question. He gave me that look and I said, well, what about birthdays at your family? Do you celebrate birthdays with a cake and candles and all of that? Sure we do. I said, when you got engaged to your wife, did you get on your knees? Did you do the whole thing with the ring? And he said, yeah, I actually did, and we were on top of a mountain, and he told me this whole story. Well, it turns out that people engage in a lot of rituals. And imagine what happens to oxytocin when people have a ritual. It skyrockets at weddings, at birthday parties, any kind of things like Christmas, Hanukkah, Ramadan, any kind of special celebration trigger oxytocin. So when I created this speech, I did not think about, great people who know how to create great client relationship and what to learn from them. I looked at the science and I found that if you find a way to create a certain ceremony, a ritual, a tradition, oxytocin levels will go up. This is Paul Zak, and he's here with Linda Geddes. She's the bride. Here she is wearing something black, but underneath she actually has her white gown, her dress. And she's having blood samples taken on her wedding day for real. And not only she, but all of the other, some other important people like the groom, the mother of the bride, etc., they all had blood samples taken. Why? In order to measure which chemical? What do you think? Oxytocin. Because they wanted to see how it will go up on an occasion such a wedding. So they actually took blood samples before the wedding, after the wedding, and this is the result. As you can see, the highest increase in oxytocin was with the bride, then the mother of the bride, the father of the groom. Did I forget anyone? Oh, yeah, the groom. So, and some people even had negative oxytocin level. That's a bit worrisome. But what you can see is there's a huge increase in oxytocin level after the vowels are spoken. So why do you get married? You could say it's just a piece of paper. Why do I need to wear this stupid ring? It annoys me. It does make a difference, okay? So in most countries, people worry that their son-in-law or daughter-in-law will walk all over them after the wedding. In French Polynesia, that's not just a worry, it's a reality. They have this tradition. I couldn't find a better picture, but they actually walk over the guests after the wedding. At least, that's one tradition they do over there. I don't know if anybody here plans on getting married in Sweden, but I would advise you to go to the bathroom before the wedding reception. Because in Sweden, the moment the groom or the bride go to the bathroom, the guests line up to kiss the groom or to kiss the bride. So that's another tradition. At least in Sweden, when there's fish at a wedding, you can be confident that they plan on eating it. In Korea, I'm not so sure. They have this feet beating ritual where the groom is getting tied up and then they beat his feet with dead fish and other things. So you don't have to do any of that stuff with your client, but you should understand that these ceremonies that we often have in politics, where you shake hands and have the flags and you hear the national anthem, they do make a difference. Okay, so it does make a difference whether you send your client an email or a beautiful handwritten note. It does make a difference whether you have a beautiful kickoff meeting with something special or whether you say, oh, we all know each other, let's get it over with, let's just, So it's an under-leveraged resource in the business world. If you have the chance to create a little ritual, do it. All of the luxury stores where you can buy expensive gifts. They wrap beautiful ribbons around your present, right? They box everything into beautiful packages. These things matter to us. We are wired to enjoy these kind of things. Women a bit more than men on average. Why is Greta Thunberg so successful? She created a ritual. The Friday for Future strikes are a ritualized way of getting together, and it's very powerful, and it's getting more and more people into it, and I think it's the power of the ritual. You had a ritual at EY. I think every single one of you had their names written on that wall, right? And this was last night. So these kind of award situations where you actually celebrate and get together, they will release something in your brain. You're not just going to kill cells in your brain with the alcohol that is served, you're also going to release oxytocin, if that is any interest to you. So I'm saying put a ring on it. If you find a chance to do a ritual, do it. And the partner that I asked whether he engaged in any rituals with his clients, it turned out he had tons of rituals. He just didn't think of them as rituals. He said, well, with Michael, and these were all CEOs, right? He was like, with Michael, I go running when I see him. With Franz, I go to the Oktoberfest. With this other guy, when we meet, we always take a walk. And for every single one of his CEO clients, he had a little thing. With this guy, I always go to Starbucks. They had their little ritual. So he didn't think of them as rituals, but he has very good relationships, and he has a lot of special ritualized things he does with people. He just didn't realize he was doing it. Well, we often think when we meet a new person, especially a client, we have to be perfect. You're the service provider, okay? You better make a good thing for your client. Well, it turns out you don't have to be so perfect after all. Research shows that if you spill coffee at a first meeting, people will like you more. Okay, I'm not telling you to spill coffee, but I think it's a bit of a relief to know you can just be yourself. If you show some vulnerabilities, if you show some weaknesses, people will actually connect to you. Because when we see somebody having trouble, oxytocin kicks in, and oxytocin helps us to help that person and make that connection. I'm having a TEDx talk later this week, and you know, the golden rule is always start with a personal story. You always have to do that in a TEDx talk. And why do you do this? Because it helps you connect to the people in the audience. So with your client, if you're sometimes not perfect or if you make mistakes, that might be the best possible thing that could happen to you. Because we bond when we see somebody who has trouble or who's not perfect or who's more human. So ask for help. Be yourself. Well, I thought by this time maybe you guys are asleep and need to wake up. What do we see here? And I can go on like this for hours because there's really many of those. Well, it turns out, and this is scientific, people choose their dog based on looks and similarity. So there was a scientific study where you had to match the owner to the dog, and then people could actually do that. So you didn't know which picture was the dog, which one was the owner, and then people could, with a high statistical likelihood, do the right match, okay? If people pick their dog based on similarity, how do you think they pick their consultant? I painted a very beautiful picture of oxytocin as the love hormone. It makes you cuddly, it makes you hug people, it makes you help people. It's also the basis for racism, discrimination, and bias. Because when we are high on oxytocin levels, we tend to help the people we perceive as our group, and we tend to become hostile towards people we perceive as outsiders. We have a very, I'm not saying it's a good thing, I'm just saying we have the tendency to form an in-group and an out-group in our heads. And the higher oxytocin levels are, the harsher this becomes. So oxytocin is not just good. What happens when you have worked, or if your client has worked with one of your competitors for 20 years, and then, well, you guys don't have to rotate, but it happens to your colleagues, and then he works with you. You might have a very difficult start. So what is my advice to you? There's two ways to go. You could either, and both ways would work. You can either have a very diverse group of consultants, make sure you have a little bit for everyone, people from different countries, people different gender, people with different working styles, different personalities, and then there will be a natural match for each client. Okay, so you can send the consultant that seems like a good match to that person. Or if you don't have that common ground, you need to find common ground. Right? If you feel like you have nothing in common with somebody, you need to think, do you share some personal interest? Is there any way you can connect to that person and overcome that bridge of thinking us versus them? That's very important also in diverse teams. You will easily feel like, I don't have anything in common with that person. You know, it happens to all of us. How do you overcome it? Well, try to find something personal, something you have in common so you can see each other as similar. Find common ground with your client. I have one final thing, and I need 2 volunteers here on stage. And I need my money, Jeff. Please, I have some money here. Can I please ask 2 people to come up here on stage? Yeah, don't feel afraid. So, yeah, a little psychological experiment. So, what's your names?
Pablo.
Pablo, is it working?
I don't think so.
I'm no expert on these things. Can we see that the microphones are working? Can you try it again?
Test.
No?
It's
Oh,
working.
perfect. So
Yeah.
Pablo?
Ashu.
Perfect. Okay. Pablo, these are €10. I give it to you in coins.
Thank
Okay. Here's the thing. You don't get to keep them. You get to share them with Ashu. And you need to make up your mind how much money Ashu will get. And if he has the right to refuse your offer. So he can say, no, I'm not taking your offer. And then all the money goes back to me. So please make him an offer. A share of your money. If he refuses it, let's see.
Let's have half.
How much did you get? €5. Okay, great.
Fine.
Are you happy?
And you have 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Or
That makes sense.
Your accountants, they count the money. Okay, so, okay, €5 here, 5. Why did you give away €5? Why not give him €1? Huh?
because I want him to accept the offer.
Yeah, but wouldn't you be happy with €1? €1 is better than €0. Didn't have to work for it. All you have to do is...
I would take 10, but 5 was better than 1.
Okay, would you have taken €1? Really think about it. Would you have been happy about the €1?
If I'm not giving back anything, I would be happy with it.
Yeah.
But I have to give back something. And that scenario, 50-50 comes across as a logical answer.
Okay, okay. Well, you can play this in many different ways. Let's for now give those two an applause. Big applause. You get to keep the money. That's my gift. Okay, I don't know about compliance. Is €10 okay? Okay, so please get off. I will explain what we just did. And you get to keep it. You can buy yourself some ice cream or something. So what did we just see here? In 2002, 2 psychologists won the Nobel Prize in Economics for this setup. It's called the ultimatum game. And what you can see there is that people maximize fairness. People do not maximize profit. The Homo economicus is based on the assumption that people will do anything to get profit. If it was like this, then Ashu would be happy with just €1. But people always refuse the €1. They refuse the €2. They refuse €3. Because they say, that wasn't a fair deal, I will turn it down, okay? And they will even pay money to punish people who made them a bad deal, men more so than women. And when you spray oxytocin into people's nose, they will get more generous. They gave away 80% more money when they were high on oxytocin. So in any negotiation situation that you have with your client, remember this: if you have a good relationship to start off, you're more likely to get a good deal, and try to make your deals win-win, because people do not care about the profit. People care about fairness. So that's my final point. I have summarized them all for you. And here's my final message. When you do these 10 things and create great client relationships, oxytocin levels will go up, both in you and your client. And when your oxytocin levels go up, you will also release dopamine, which gives you a burst of joy and happiness. And you will also release serotonin, which gives you emotional stability and well-being. So it's not just going to make you more profitable to have good client relationships, it will make you happier too. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful.